Okay, so if you've been following AI, you hear these just astronomical numbers, right? Trillions of dollars, world-changing tech. It's constant.
Oh, absolutely. The hype cycle is, well, it's intense.
But I find the really fascinating part is where all that ambition, the trillion-dollar stuff, actually hits the ground, where it meets, like, government policy, red tape.
Exactly, because we're not just talking software anymore, are we? This is about physical stuff now. Huge physical commitments.
Concrete, copper.
Power plants, yeah. Massive data centers. And the money involved, the sheer scale, it means we have to talk about things like tax credits, raw materials. It's becoming a very real-world infrastructure problem.
Right. And that's what we want to dive into today. We've been looking at this letter, an official request, really, from OpenAI sent over to the White House.
Detailing specific policy changes they say they need.
Yeah, need. And we want to unpack that. What are they asking for? What are the financial levers? And maybe more importantly, what are the bottlenecks they see holding up this massive AI build-out in the U.S.? Things money alone maybe can't fix.
And, we also have to touch on the sort of public relations drama that happened right after, this whole back and forth about government guarantees versus tax breaks.
Yeah, that get interesting.
It really shows how these huge tech players are trying to navigate asking for government help while, keeping up that image of pure private innovation.
Okay, so let's start with the core ask. The main thing in this letter, from OpenAI's Global Affairs Chief, Chris Lehane, to Michael Kratsios at the White House, it focuses on one specific tax thing.
Right. It's called the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit. AM for short.
HIAM. Okay, and that sounds familiar. Part of the CHIPS Act.
Exactly. You got it. Part of the Biden administration's big push. And originally, AMCO was all about boosting semiconductor manufacturing here in the U.S.
Bringing those chip fabrication plants, the fabs, back home, makes sense.
Yeah. So it's this 35% tax credit, pretty substantial, designed to help with the huge cost of building those super complex, expensive chip factories. It was about securing the silicon supply chain, basically.
Okay, 35% for chip fabs. But OpenAI isn't building fabs, are they? So what's their angle?
Well, they're arguing that the whole idea of advanced manufacturing needs, a big update for the AI era. They want that 35% credit expanded.
Expanded to cover what, exactly?
Three main things. All infrastructure supporting AI, not just making the chips. So first, the AI servers themselves. Second, the massive AI data centers needed to house thousands of those servers.
Okay, servers, data centers. That seems logical if you're supporting AI. What's the third?
And this is the one that kind of jumps out. Electrical grid components.
Wait, hold on. Electrical grid components. So OpenAI, a company known for, software and models, is asking for tax credits on things like transformers and power lines.
Yeah. It seems like a leap, right? From algorithms to, national power infrastructure, but it actually makes a ton of sense when you think about it.
Why? What's the connection?
It's the power consumption. It's just enormous. These current AI models are incredibly power hungry. Training them, running them, it puts a massive immediate strain on the grid.
Okay.
So if you don't upgrade the grid infrastructure, the transformers, the substations, all that stuff, at the same time you're building these giant data centers, well, the data centers can't run at full tilt. They become bottlenecks themselves.
Ah, so the grid is the weak link. They can build the shiny data center, but if there's not enough juice or reliable juice, it's useless.
Precisely. So asking for the AMIC credit to cover grid components is basically OpenAI saying, look, we need the government to help incentivize the power upgrades needed to support our massive energy demand. It's almost a shared resource problem.
That reframes it a bit. Less like a corporate handout, more like tackling a national infrastructure bottleneck that AI is exposing. And that 35%, given the scale they're talking, that's potentially a huge amount of money.
Oh, absolutely enormous. We'll get to the numbers, but yeah. And Lassane's explicit argument in the letter is about risk. He basically says broadening AMI will, and I'm quoting loosely here, lower the effective cost of capital, de-risk early investment, and unlock private capital.
Right, so make it cheaper and safer for private investors to pour money into building these incredibly expensive data centers and the power systems they need. Use tax policy to steer private funds.
It's a classic play, really. Use the government's financial leverage to share some of the upfront risk on these huge long-term infrastructure bets.
Okay, so the AMIC expansion tackles the cost. But OpenAI clearly realized money isn't the only problem, right? What about the other hurdles mentioned in the letter? The non-financial stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Because even if you have the billions lined up, you still have to, actually build the thing. Which brings us to the more practical, logistical
The
problem.
stuff that a tax break doesn't fix.
Right. So two main things there. First, they asked for help speeding up the permitting and environmental review process.
Ah, the red tape issue.
You got it if you're trying to build potentially thousands of data centers, plus grid upgrades. Waiting years for permits is just, it's a killer for timelines. They need things to move faster. Bureaucracy is a bottleneck.
Okay, faster permits. What was the second practical ask? It was about materials, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this one connects AI directly to geopolitics and global supply chains. It wasn't just about silicon chips, which the CHIPS Act already kind of covers.
So what materials are we talking about?
They specifically asked for the creation of a strategic reserve of certain raw materials.
A strategic reserve, like we have for oil, for AI materials.
Kind of, yeah. The materials they named were copper, aluminum, and processed rare earth minerals.
Copper and aluminum, I mean, I get rare earths are strategic, but copper, isn't that just wire?
Well, yes and no. It's wire, but it's also absolutely critical for the huge cooling systems these data centers need. Liquid cooling uses a ton of copper, and transformers for the grid need massive amounts. Aluminum is key for structures, conductivity.
Okay, so it's the sheer scale of demand that's the issue.
Exactly. They're worried about the speed and reliability of sourcing these vast quantities. If a shortage of copper slows down data center construction or grid upgrades, the whole U.S. AI build-out lags behind. It becomes a national competitiveness issue.
Wow. So the need for copper becomes tied to staying ahead in AI. That really brings us to the financial context underpinning all of this. These aren't small requests because the company making them isn't small anymore. The scale is just staggering.
That's really the key context for you listening. OpenAI is projecting, an annualized revenue run rate over $20 billion by the end of 2025.
20 billion. And planning for hundreds of billions by 2030, that's serious big tech territory.
And then there's the commitment figure they threw out.
The $1.4 trillion number.
Yeah, $1.4 trillion in capital commitments for the next 8 years.
1.4 trillion. I mean, that's almost the size of Australia's entire economy, or Spain's. It's just mind-boggling.
It really is. And that number is why all these policy asks matter so much. When you're talking $1.4 trillion in planned spending, that 35% AMIC tax credit we discussed, that's not just helpful, it's potentially hundreds of billions in savings or freed up capital.
And any delay from permitting or a copper shortage, it suddenly threatens the return on this colossal investment.
Absolutely. Which actually leads us right into that controversy you mentioned earlier, the one about government guarantees.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with numbers this big, asking for government help gets politically very, very sensitive.
Right, the blowback. How did that start?
It kicked off when OpenAI's CFO, Sarah Fryer, was speaking at a Wall Street Journal event. And she said something about the government needing to, quote, backstop their infrastructure loans.
Oof, backstop. That word carries a lot of weight. It sounds like asking for a bailout, doesn't it?
Exactly. It immediately brought up images of, taxpayer money being on the hook if things go wrong, which is totally different from a tax credit.
How so? Explain that difference, because it's crucial.
Okay, so a tax credit, like AMX, is generally available to any company that qualifies. It lowers your tax bill if you make certain investments. It reduces the cost of doing business, helps de-risk it for private investors. But a backstop or a loan guarantee, that means the government steps in and says, if this specific project fails, if OpenAI defaults on these loans, we, the taxpayers, will cover the losses.
So direct financial risk for the government versus just a general incentive. Huge difference.
Massive difference, politically and financially. So when Fryer used backstop, suggesting the government should insure parts of that $1.4 trillion plan, well, you can imagine the reaction.
Yeah, how fast did they try to fix that?
Almost immediately. Fryer went on LinkedIn, put out a statement saying, basically, whoops, bad word choice. She wrote, OpenAI is not seeking a government backstop for our infrastructure commitments. I used the word backstop, and it muddied the point. They needed to stamp that fire out fast.
And then Sam Altman, the CEO, weighed in pretty strongly too, didn't he? To draw a clear line.
He did. He had to. He put out a statement saying explicitly that the company does not have or want government guarantees for OpenAI data centers. He really leaned into the principle that governments shouldn't pick winners or losers, and taxpayers shouldn't bail out companies that make bad business decisions.
Which is, essential messaging if you want to maintain that image of being a dynamic private company, even while you're asking for significant government policy changes like the AMIC expansion.
It's a very careful balancing act, saying we want structural help to lower costs and speed things up, but we are not asking for a safety net if our specific business ventures fail.
Did Altman completely close the door on guarantees, though? Or was there a nuance?
There was a nuance, and it's revealing. He did concede they had discussed loan guarantees, but, and this is the key part, only as part of supporting the build-out of semiconductor fabs in the U.S.
Ah. Okay, so guarantees are okay if they support the national goal of domestic chip making, which benefits everyone.
Right, a shared national priority.
But not okay if they directly backstop OpenAI's own data center projects. That's their line.
That seems to be the strategy, yeah. Share the risk on the foundational supply chain stuff, like chips funded by the CHIPS Act, but keep the risk for their specific data center build-out private while still asking for tax credits and faster permits for those private projects.
It really highlights the core tension here, doesn't it? This massively capitalized company, $1.4 trillion in commitments, is simultaneously saying its success depends on very specific government actions, tax breaks, faster permits, maybe even help securing copper, while firmly rejecting any notion of a direct bailout.
That's the crux of it. Unprecedented private ambition needing very specific public policy levers to actually happen at the speed and scale they envision.
So wrapping this up, what are the main things you, our listeners, should really take away from this whole situation?
Well, first, I think is just how physical the future of AI is. It's
Uh-huh.
not just code in the cloud, it's data centers, it's copper, it's massive power demands on the grid. That infrastructure is fundamental.
And the cost and speed of building that infrastructure are now major policy negotiation points, right? Things like expanding the AME tax credit are where the rubber meets the road for this AI build-out.
Absolutely. And second, the scale of this private sector demand is now forcing the government to think about basic materials like copper and aluminum, almost like strategic assets, maybe in the way they used to think only about, say, oil or critical defense components.
Which leads to that final thought, connecting it all to the bigger picture. When private companies need so much copper, aluminum, and rare earths that securing them becomes a national priority, what does that mean? Does the private sector's infrastructure demand start driving foreign policy? Maybe shaping how the U.S. approaches resource-rich nations or global supply chains for these basic materials?
It's a huge question. How much does the race for AI dominance start to look like the old geopolitical races for oil or other resources?
Something for you to definitely think about as this AI build-out continues to accelerate, not just here, but around the world.